Hey everyone. In this video, I want to guide you through provisioning a Google Cloud project as well as the Apigee X API management platform in Google Cloud, all in one go, so completely automated end-to-end in a Quickstart format. So meaning really from start to finish, no manual intervention needed, everything automated. And we're going to do this in a couple of different approaches. So let's just dive right in. We're going to start off by going through a GitHub project that has the automation scripts ready for us to look at and use. We can import those directly into a Google Cloud Shell, which is a serverless free Linux shell that we can use directly in our web browser. So it's super practical for these types of exercises. After that, we're going to divide our journey into two parts. The first one is we're going to do the complete provisioning of the Google Cloud project, as well as org policies that we need, and Apigee X instance using shell scripts. So this is just using the gcloud CLI. Shell scripting, it's very powerful, but also a little bit more complex. But nevertheless, this is completely encapsulated, super easy. So that's going to be part one. Part two, we're going to do the exact same thing, but using Terraform scripts. So Terraform, or not even scripts really, but configuration files, right? So Terraform is more compact. We don't have to have any real scripts, but just configuration variable files. And so we're going to use those then in part two. In part three, we're going to take a look at everything that we provisioned and test some things out. So deploy some APIs and products, test those, and then wrap it up with a conclusion. So let's go directly to our demo. We're going to use some resources that I published into a GitHub repo called Apigee X Quickstart. So let's go ahead and open that up. And the Quickstart project, it's a public repo, so anyone can access it. We have, first of all, the docs, the shell script, and the Terraform scripts. Everything is ready to use. And we can also either clone it and use it locally in our own environment, or just click here and open both of these approaches in a Google Cloud Shell, which is, again, completely managed, free, easy to use shell that we can use directly in our browser. So let's go ahead and open the shell deployment right now. When we click on Open in Cloud Shell, we do have to trust this repo because the repo will be cloned into our shell environment. So let's trust that. And now we see that our shell environment's being provisioned. The repository was cloned, so we can see all the files here in the shell down here. And we also get this super practical Cloud Shell editor to also be able to edit files visually here as well. So we can access all of the files from the repository here locally as well. On the right hand side, we have a tutorial that we can use. So it's basically just the information from the README, but here in a step-by-step format. And so let's just go through and do the provisioning here together. The first step is to set up the environment, and for that we have an env.sh shell file. So let's click here to open that in the editor. Here we can set the configuration for the GCP project that should be created. So let's call it Cloud30X. The network default, just use a default VPC network. The location for any cloud data or resources that are provisioned. So let's just use Europe West in Brussels, Belgium, which is also a low CO2 location. So our cloud resources produce less CO2 than in some other options. And then we can also fill in a billing ID here, which is attached for any some cloud resources need a billing ID to be able to be provisioned. So let's just go ahead and copy that in here. That doesn't mean things will be billed. A lot of these services are either free or have free tiers, but the billing ID is just necessary for some more advanced cloud services to deploy those. So let's go ahead and save that change. And then this is actually super practical here in the tutorial. To source that into our environment, we can just click here the Copy to Cloud Shell button, and this will then be copied automatically into our shell, and we can just execute it, and then that's finished and executed. So let's move on to the next step. The next step is to create a GCP project. And so this is, again, super automated and flexible. If we open up the script for that by clicking here, create project.sh, we see that basically it's just gcloud projects create for the chosen project name. And then if a billing ID is supplied, then this will be attached to that project. And that's it, right? So let's go ahead and execute that in our environment. This takes a moment, so the entire project is now being created, and the billing ID attached. And then while that's completing, let's move on to the next step. And the next step is to prepare the GCP project. So if we open this file here in the bash, in our shell editor, we can see that we're just going to enable some services for org policy, Cloud Resource Manager, set some policies on that created project. So Apigee, for example, needs to be able to have external IP addresses if we want to offer our APIs through a domain, or through an IP or domain to external clients. So this has to be enabled and allowed, and a couple of other policies that we can set here as well. If we have any additional policies or anything we want to configure for that project, we can just add it here as well and use the different gcloud CLI commands to do that configuration. So let's just execute that directly here as well. This takes a moment, so it's going to read out our project number, set those configuration policies, and then apply those into our project. So while we're waiting for that to finish, let's move on to the next step. And the next step is actually to provision Apigee X. So if we open up the provision Apigee file, we just see this is actually super easy. The Apigee DevRel team, which is just developer relations, produces open source tools and components that we can reuse very nicely in our projects, has a provisioning script or a tool called Apigee X Trial Provision. And basically we're just going to download that and execute that. And that does everything end to end, so we don't even have to recreate any of that script logic in our own scripts, but we can just reference that to do the provisioning. So that's super easy. It just needs a project and a location as an environment variable. So we're waiting for the policy, and as you can see here, the policies are all being applied to our project. So this is just doing the configuration that our project is configured correctly to for our Apigee deployment or any other resources we want to deploy into this project. Okay, so we're good to go. So let's go ahead and copy the provision Apigee in here and execute it. And this is actually going to download that provisioning script and execute it with this configuration. As you can see, it's using our project and network environment variables, as well as that managed domain prefix. We also set this to be API. This is just that domain that we're going to get for our API calls, that it has a particular prefix to make it very clear what's being done there, and that's going to be an API prefix for that domain that's created. Good. This provisioning usually takes between 10-20 minutes. Behind the scenes, we're getting a managed Kubernetes cluster in our chosen region provisioned for us. That's where Apigee X is going to be run. So let's wait for that to finish, and then we'll come back when the provisioning is complete. So now our deployment is finished, and we have here the message, that the deployment status is ready. Our certificate is also provisioned to access our load balancer endpoints. We have an HTTPS endpoint that we can test with. So let's go ahead and test here. It says, let's give just a test call. This certificate in this domain is just, a free service that we can use to get an HTTPS endpoint that works for testing purposes. We could, of course, provide our own certificate for our own domain and connect that to our load balancer as well. So let's just copy that test, paste it in here, and so as you can see, we can call that endpoint. There's a default hello world proxy that is provisioned with the automation, and then we get the hello guest response back. So we have Apigee, load balancer, networking, GCP project, policies, everything needed for this environment provisioned in one go through the automation scripts here. If we switch over to the Apigee console, apigee.google.com, we can see then our Cloud 30X project here, along with any other projects that we might have provisioned. We can also see that Hello World proxy that's deployed, as well as the environments that were created through the provisioning, the eval environment, and then our environment group that's connected to that host name that we can call and test our APIs with, and reach our APIs with to the environment eval. So that completes the shell provisioning, and now in part 2, we'll do the exact same thing using Terraform.